Thank you. Bear with me for just a moment here while I switch over our PowerPoint presentation. Okay, there we go. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you to Microsol, Box Technologies, and to the Center for Architecture here for hosting us. You can hear me? Okay. Let me see if I can adjust this just a bit better. Okay. My name is Brian Russell. I'm a business development manager, as Corey said, for AEC and design at Chaos Group. I'm the current acting product manager for V-Ray for REVIT. Over 20 years in the AEC industry. And today I want to talk just a bit about what we did when it came to V-Ray for REVIT. As Corey mentioned earlier, I was the integrated practice manager for an architecture firm in Baltimore. It's a BIM manager, effectively. And I want to go back because there's a bit of history there with Corey and I, and I'll make this quick because my time is short. But when we first started doing visualization at Air St. Gros almost 20 years ago, we had this very simple problem. Designers were designing and we were rendering. And the more they designed, the more we rendered, and the more we rendered, the more they designed. So there was a disconnect. And that disconnect was this. Rendering is most powerful in the hands of designers. Because it gives them design feedback that's immediate. It gives them access to the repercussions of their design that's immediate and allows them to do something that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And so we really wanted to find a way to get these tools in the hands of designers. Actually, if we were doing our jobs correctly as visualization specialists, we would get to focus more on things like, what does the camera setup look like? What does the content surrounding the building look like? The trees, the cars, the people, things of that nature. And so I'm happy to say, you know, when Corey brought me back on board to do V-Ray for REVIT, that the very first thing that I got to do was to sit down and interview literally hundreds of firms and ask them, what is it that you want in a visualization platform with REVIT? And we got some pretty resounding feedback. One is it had to be made accessible to designers. Well, that's great because that already aligned with our vision. We needed to simplify the interaction. And a few of you that have used V-Ray in the past, V-Ray for Macs, know we have a bell and whistle for almost everything. And it really does take years to master V-Ray inside of 3D Studio Max. However, as designers, often you don't have time to go through that and find that balance of speed and accuracy. And so we were very cognizant of that and made sure that when we did V-Ray for REVIT, that we did it so in a way that was meaningful to designers. We needed to get quality results. It needed to look as close as we could to what you were getting out of Max, and we needed to make it fast. So this is the toolbar that's integrated inside of V-Ray for REVIT. It's a simple and intuitive interface for designers. If you're familiar with using REVIT, this is going to be a very familiar territory for you. The important features are there. They're readily accessible. It fits within your existing workflows, and it really is only what you need. So we're not giving you all the bells and whistles, but we are giving you what you need in order to produce quick renderings that are fast feedback as part of your design iteration. So we're going to highlight, you're going to see throughout kind of a common thread here. It's the Barcelona Pavilion from Mies van der Rohe. And I've got a bit of a video here that should show you just how easy it is. You select your view inside of V-Ray for REVIT. And you select your quality settings, draft, low, medium, high. And depending on what your settings are there, it will either take longer but look better. You set your resolution. Adjust your lights, sunlight, daylight, artificial light, and hit render. And now what's going to happen is, and this is going to take just a little bit of time, it's going to send all of that geometry, all of those material settings, any overrides that we've got there, over to the V-Ray renderer, it's going to pick it up and start to process it. Once it picks it up and starts to process it, it'll be very fast. Now, the reason why this is acting as slowly as it is because we have many 2K and 4K textures in here. So for the folks that know what that stuff is, these are big, huge texture maps that are driving quality behind the scenes. But we wanted to show you that you can use that level inside of V-Ray, both in GPU and in CPU processing. So in interactive processing, you can do this, although we suggest you don't, but you can also do it in standard bucket mode, if you will. Materials are very important. We have full Revit material support. So if you work inside of Revit natively, we want to make sure that we're non-destructive to the BIM. This is really important. And as such, we take whatever materials that you establish inside of Revit and we parse them over to V-Ray materials at render time. It's not something that you need to worry about. It's done for you. We're just going to take all of the channels that are there and basically map them over to V-Ray friendly ones. And when you hit render, you're going to get some output that looks pretty close to what it would in the traditional Autodesk render, but is also non-destructive to your BIM. You do have the ability to use V-Ray.VR mats. That's our proprietary VR mat or V-Ray mat. And one thing I want to point out with VR mats, and we'll discuss this a bit later, is that VR mats now in the 3.x platforms are universal. So if we create them in Max, we can use them in Maya, we can use them in Revit, we can use them in SketchUp, we can use them in Rhino. So if you want to build your material libraries, you can do so. That will allow us to do things like create a V-Ray, full V-Ray material library that can be used across all your platforms, and you can use them as override materials inside of V-Ray for Revit. So I'll actually just show you really quickly, talking about user interaction, that we do have a standalone material editor that we ship with V-Ray for Revit. The interface should be somewhat familiar. It's very close to what you're going to see in the user interface for Rhino and SketchUp. And as we continue down our roadmap, we'll be getting closer and aligning those user interfaces as much as we can so that the user experience between Revit, Rhino, and SketchUp will be very familiar, but you won't lose that integration to the host application. Global override materials. I'm sure a few of you can attest to what happens when you go into a pre-design or schematic design meeting with a client and you've got materials on your model and they want to know why the floor has that carpet and derail your meeting with a 2-hour session on why the color's blue rather than green. What you really want them to focus on is what's happening with the form and the space. What's happening with the lighting inside the space, what's the experience inside the space. And so to that end, we've included the ability to override opaque and transparent materials separately. We're going to continue to build on this so that you'll actually be able to override separate elements or linked elements inside of Revit individually. So stay tuned on that. More to come on that very, very soon. But do know that you can use VR mats to override very quickly and very easily. And we will be supporting, you see RPC content in there. They have their own native ability to be overridden. They've got a program that ships with their stuff. The ArcVision guys do. And we'll support those in the near future as well. So when those overrides, when you set overrides for RPC, we'll read those in to our scenes. Environment, again, non-destructive to the BIM. So a couple of key features here. When you're doing interactive rendering in RT, if you change the time of day, you'll actually see that update live in Viewport. And I'll give you an example of that here in just a moment. We fully support Revit's sun system. So if you change time of day or attitude and azimuth, we'll pull those things across. And we simply replace the built-in sun with the V-Ray sun, and we use the Hasek et al. Sky for our background, and we'll talk a bit more about that in detail with you if you'd like after. We also support solid color and HDR image-based lighting as a dome light inside of V-Ray for Revit. So a quick video here. We've got our interactive renderer operating. We're going to make changes to altitude and azimuth here, and give it just a moment and you'll see updates right in right in the render preview for time of day. Now, if you've got more hardware available to you, better graphics hardware, GPU, CPU, we also support interactive rendering and CPU available to you, the time that it takes to do this processing becomes much, much faster. So you can actually do this in some cases. I've seen this happen in client meetings, which is really our goal, right? You should be able to do this in a client meeting if that's what you'd like to do. Skipping forward camera modes. Everybody wants VR camera mode right now, right? For two reasons. One, designers want it because they want to feel and understand design implications of their space right away. And two, there's something to be said with sitting in front of a client and either having a VR headset available for them to see their space, or even a web-based or a web-hosted thing that they can turn around and spin around. And I'll give you an example of that here in just a moment. So to that end, inside of V-Ray for Revit, we have a few different camera types: standard, stereoscopic, VR, and VR stereo output. The most commonly used is stereoscopic VR camera output, which will allow you to do left and right channel automatically. So you just select the camera type and render. It's really just that simple. The output you get is going to be an image that you can then take to a Gear VR or send to a Google Cardboard with minimal to no post-processing whatsoever. Quick video of one of our VR outputs. This is in a web-hosted application so that you can just see the ability to kind of spin around the scene. Again, VR mats and an override on a small Revit model that one of our top guys built in our Baltimore offices, one of his thesis projects. So. Artificial lights. Often your Revit models have many, many lights. We understand that. We respect that. So to that end, we needed to use the existing Revit lights, again, non-destructive to the BIM. So we're reading IES files. If you don't specify an IES file in your Revit family, we will use the generic IES file that ships with Revit. But you do have the ability to specify a specific IES file, and through that we'll get color temperature, we'll get the fall off, all of those important light settings we'll pull through, so your designs actually show what that light fixture is and what it's doing. So really inside of V-Ray for Revit, it's a click of a button to see what's happening with lighting. You turn them on or you turn them off. We will support light groups in the near future, so you'll be able to turn them on and off respectively as you would like. And we do support all the properties inside of Revit itself. So as you change the voltage or the wattage, the lumens, we respect those changes and pull them across. So we've got a small video here just to show some of what we're doing, again, with exposure values. They're on a slider now, and you're seeing this live in the interactive view. But we can adjust exposure values on a slider, as well as white balance. We've got a few other camera settings in there if you want to do depth of field controls, things like that, to add a little dimensionality to your renderings. But you can see as we bring our sun intensity down, we have to, because we work on the premise of a physical camera, we actually have to fake the sun, because in reality what you'd end up with is an overbright thing if you have your light settings in a certain way. So you can see we're bringing our exposure values down a bit and turning our sun down a bit so that we can see our lights balanced inside of our scene. Just touch a bit on V-Ray Swarm. It's our distributed rendering solution for V-Ray for Revit. Really gives you lots of extra power. CPU and GPU are supported. Easy throttling controls. For those of you who don't have an IT manager sitting there who can do updates for all of your individual render nodes, it's really easy to install. You can manage all of your individual nodes from any of the nodes. So it's got a web-based interface. Easy throttling controls, and I hate to say elastic because it's so overused, but it really is elastic, so you can make the use of even your production machines. So when someone gets up from their machine to go grab a coffee, we're going to use whatever their processing power is while they're away. The minute they come back and move the mouse, they're back in action, and they notice little to no hesitation on their end computer, so that you can make the most of what you have available to you. So swarm in action, you're seeing bucket modes here, and you saw how we went from like 5 or 6 to several very, very quickly and very, very easily. This also works with progressive, not just buckets, but buckets makes it obvious what's happening there. And we're continuing to make improvements to this end as we go along. Finally, last thing I want to touch on here, and I'll let you guys take a look at SketchUp and Rhino, is our pipeline to 3ds Max. You know, there's a couple keys to this functionality, and I know it's very, very early, but one of the things that comes up often is I want, as a visualization specialist inside of my firm, I want to be able to set up the exterior scene and just bring in the model from the designers, because it may be 11th hour, it will be 11th hour, let's be honest, right? I want to be able to bring that model in, not have to worry about tweaking it too much, but I want to be able to set the environment. I want to be able to set the parameters. So inside of Revit, we do have the ability to actually do setups and save those and share those. So your visualization specialist can do a quick setup of lighting, of material overrides, things like that, and then they can share that out with your entire team. You can load that into V-Ray for Revit. It does those overrides automatically. You don't have to think about it. You hit the render button, and those overrides are already there. In addition to that, we do have a pipeline to 3ds Max using an export. It's a simple geometry export that will allow you to get directly into, in this case, we're just going to set this at very high. We're going to export. It's going to tessellate the geometry automatically for us. We'll give it a name and export that VRC now. This is going to take just a bit of time. Gathers all of the material information, all of the geometry information, and moves forward. And let me see if I can actually speed this up a little bit. It may not let me. No, it's not going to let me. Sorry. So bear with me just a moment here. But once that VR scene is exported, we can then come over to 3ds Max, where we've already set up our cameras. We've already set up our daylight settings. We've already set up maybe even some interior lights. So we've got a couple of simple rigs in here. And we pull over the VR scene there, point to it, open it up. And this is the really cool part in my mind, because we set our 0, 0 so that we're centered, and we hit the render button, and we get one for one what we had in Revit. So this is really significant for workflows back and forth. And what you're going to see here is primarily what you saw exactly sitting over in Revit. There are no surprises. The designers aren't getting surprised by what you're doing. You're not getting surprised by what they're doing. Ultimately, our end goal here would be the ability for you to make changes to individual objects after the fact inside of this, and then push those back to the verticals. And so to that end, we're working on what that might look like in our pipeline, and I'd love to hear your feedback about it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over and let you guys see a bit. I may be a bit early. I'm okay on time. Are you ready? And we're going to do a computer switch here, so bear with us momentarily as we do that switch.